Hello everyone and welcome to week 4 of English 200, 201, and 202. This week we'll be talking about working in form. Form in poetry is one of the most important lessons to learn, how to use form, how to write against form, and how to understand a form's history. This week we're going to be focusing primarily on the sonnet. So I'd like you to begin by reading chapter 4 on form in Serious Daring. Then I'd also like you to read Olio by Tyemba Jess. This is one of the required books for this course and can still be purchased at the bookstore. You can get it online, but I don't know that it'll get here in time so you can complete this week's assignment. But maybe you can get it from Wave Books and from Amazon. And I'd like you also to read the poems included in this lecture. So, as I mentioned, poetic forms, such as the sonnet or the sestina, are one of the elements of poetry, like diction, images, music of poetry, meter and rhythm, and lines and stanzas. We've already talked about lines and stanzas, images, symbols, and figurative language in the music of poetry, and now we're moving on to poetic forms, and this is a 2-week lesson. So this week we're going to be talking about the sonnet. So the sonnet is one of the older forms. The basics about the sonnet are sonnets are 14 lines long with 10 syllables per line. And all sonnets contain something called a volta, or a turn. It's a place in the poem where the poem turns on its head so you can see it from a totally different perspective, whatever you're looking at. And sonnets are really intimate forms. They're like a little room where you light up an image. You look at an image close to the light and you really try to understand it. And it's really a place where you can talk back to history, and we'll see some poems that do that. Or you can declare love. It's just a really small room that echoes really loudly. There's three main forms. There's a Shakespearean sonnet, which was invented basically by Shakespeare, and it has a rhyming scheme of A, B, C, D, E, F, and then a rhyming couplet at the end, G, G. And then Petrarch, he invented the Petrarchian sonnet. Petrarch was in love with a woman named Lara, who he never even got to go on a date with, but he wrote hundreds of sonnets for her. And he wrote them always with the rhyme scheme of A, B, A, B, C, D, E. But the modern sonnet, which is also called the American sonnet, has no set rhyme scheme. It actually uses the same format of 14 lines, 10 syllables per line, mostly. Sometimes it breaks the rules. It's like a little room that takes an image and turns it upside down for us to look at it differently. But it doesn't have a rhyme scheme. Doesn't mean it doesn't use rhyme. It just means it only uses rhyme as a way to emphasize what's happening in the poem. And what we will be working on this week is creating American sonnets. So let's start with a formal poet, a formal poem by a formal poet. This is called Fairy Tale Logic, and it's by A.E. Stallings. Fairy tales are full of impossible tasks. Gather the chin hairs of a man-eating goat, or cross a sulfuric lake in a leaky boat. Select the prince from a row of identical masks. Tiptoe up to a dragon where it basks, and snatch its bone. Count dust specks mote by mote, or learn the phone directory by rote. Always it's impossible what someone asks. You have to fight magic with magic. You have to believe that you have something impossible up your sleeve. The language of snakes, perhaps an invisible cloak, an army of ants at your beck, or a lethal joke. The will to do whatever must be done. Marry a monster. Hand over your firstborn son. Now you can see in this sonnet the rhyme scheme, which is, looking at fairy tales and turning it upside down. But you can see that the rhyme scheme is A, tasks, B, goat, B, boat, and then A, masks, right? Do you see that? So let's go back to A, B, B, A, A, B, B, A. This is a Petrarchian sonnet. You got it? Okay. And if you go through it, you can see. Again, it's very formal, but we're going to be challenging this form when we work on it today. Now here's a non-formal poem. This is by Terence Hayes, and it's from his book American Sonnet for My Past and Future Assassin, and it's called I Lock You in an American Sonnet That Is Part Prison. I lock you in an American sonnet that is part prison, part panic closet, a little room in a house set aflame. I lock you in a form that is part music box, part meat grinder, to separate the song of the bird from the bone. I lock your persona in a dream-inducing sleeper hold while your better selves watch from the bleachers. I make you both Jim and Crow here. As the Crow, you undergo a beautiful catharsis, trapped one night in the shadows of the gym. As the Jim, the feel of the crow shit dropping to your floors is not unlike the stars falling from the pep rally posters on your walls. I make you a box of darkness with a bird in its heart. Voltas of acoustics, instinct, and metaphor. It is not enough to love you. It is not enough to want you destroyed. So in this sonnet, which is a imprisoning form, right? This is Terence Hayes, who's an African-American poet, writing back against American history. He plays with Jim Crow, right? The Jim Crow laws by changing the words to Jim and Crow here and like a gymnasium, right? And you'll notice that the rhymes are different here, right? And if we count the syllables, I lock you in an American sonnet that is part prison, right? That's not 10 syllables, right? He is not following the rules because he is rebelling against the rules in order to make this. But again, it is a small room. We are looking at something very closely and turning it upside down. Okay, here's another one, and I wanted to give you this one because it's part of a wreath of poems. And a wreath of poems are interconnected sonnets where the last line of the first sonnet becomes the first line of the second sonnet, and so forth, until you get to the last sonnet. And the last sonnet connects back to the first sonnet. So here is sonnet number 4. Emmett Till's name, and it's important that you know who Emmett Till is before you read this poem. He was a young African-American boy who went to visit relatives and was attacked and lynched and killed when he was in the South. Emmett Till's name still catches in my throat like syllables waylaid in a stutterer's mouth. A 14-year-old stutterer in the South to visit relatives and to be taught the family's ways. His mother had finally bought that White Sox cap. She'd made him swear an oath to be careful around white folks. She'd told him the truth of many a Mississippi anecdote. Some white folks have blind souls. In his suitcase she packed dungarees, t-shirts, underwear, and comic books. She'd given him a note for the conductor, waved to his chubby face, wondered if he'd remember to brush his hair. Her only child, a body left to bloat. So in the next poem in the sequence, the next line would say, her only child, a body left to bloat. It would continue with 13 more lines that are written off of that. Now look at the rhyme scheme in this one. Throat, A, mouth, south, BB, tot, bot, CD, right? Oath, truth, anecdote, suitcase, where. You've got a breaking down of a rhyme scheme, right? Some rhymes, some are off rhymes, right? she's not sticking to the rhyme. She's letting the poem's images dictate the decisions she makes in this poem, okay? Next, this is a video from TEDx Nashville on Tyehimba Jess, and this is before he wrote the book Olio. This is when he was writing the poems that would be included in this book, and it's a great presentation. I want you to stop and listen to it, and then come back to me, okay? Once you do, though, then we're going to talk some more about Tyehimba Jess and his book Olio. Please make sure that you also take some time to start looking at that book. So Journal 10 will be, I'd like you to write about that collection of poems, Olio. And when you read through it, I want you to choose one of the poems to read closely and discuss. So I want you to read it, and just like we talked about these last sonnets, I want you to tell me how he uses the sonnet form. Does he change it? Does he stick with it? Does he move the poem around the page? And I want your response to be 500 words. And I want you to tell me what the sonnet is about. Like, do a close reading. So tell me what is, what's being said in the poem, okay? Then your journal exercise will be to write a series of sonnets, like Olio or like A Wreath for Emmett Till. I'd like you to write at least 3 14-line, 10-syllable per line sonnets, okay? Do not use exact rhymes on the end words. You need to not use them. I want you to try to use something different. Instead, try to really focus on choosing the end words based on meaning. What word do you want to emphasize, right? What word is the most important to emphasize and makes the most meaning when you do that? I want you to make sure each of your sonnets has a turn. Remember that, where you turn whatever you've brought into the room of the sonnet to be examined upside down, or to be held up to the light and looked at in a different way. Like Tyehimba Jess, I want you to think about a historical subject that you could take on and write about, okay? You don't be afraid to play with how the sonnet looks on the page as well. You'll see when you read Olio that he frees himself from the left-hand margin in order to really, and I know I've told some of you to stick to the left-hand margin. I want you to think about why you might want to leave the left-hand margin and what it'll do to your poem, okay? So I want you to have fun with this, but don't make all of them crazy. Like, only do it if you want to convey a meaning using a different form, okay? All right, finally, for you English 201, 202 people writing a poem a day, I'm so proud of the work that you're doing so far. You're doing a great job. You see probably that I'm suffering with you. We're on day 4, right? I'm trying to post my poems as well. So tomorrow you're going to write a golden shovel. Now you guys are all aware of that, right? You read Terrence Hayes' golden shovel poem earlier this semester, right? So I want you to, if you want a better explanation of what a golden shovel is, this link takes you to Don Scher's explanation of the form. Basically, you're going to take a poem you really like and just use the end words, right, to make your own poem. On February 6th, you're going to write a poem with the title, where you use this title, or you use it as a line in the poem, The Dream Time History of America, okay? That's it. That's the only prompt. And then on the 7th, you're going to write a sonnet where you play with the layout on the page. So this could be where you're doing the work for your assignment in class. On February 8th, you're going to write a poem about something you think is unspeakable, a horrible event or a thing of great beauty, where instead of describing the event or thing, you use repetition. So here's an example. Langston Hughes traveled to South Africa, and he wrote a poem called Johannesburg Mines. And it goes, in the Johannesburg mines, there are 240,000 natives working. What kind of poem would you make out of that? 240,000 natives working in the Johannesburg mines. Another example is the great poet Basho, who's famous for writing haiku, visited a place called Matsushima Bay. And I've been lucky enough to visit this place in my lifetime. It's this giant bay filled with all these different islands of all different sizes, from tiny, tiny islands to islands as big as, 10 football fields. And on them, they're all rocky, and there's these little tiny pines that look like bonsais on all of them. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. And he wrote a haiku about it, where he just says, Matsushima, Matsushima, Matsushima. And that's the poem. It's so amazing. All right. So on February 9th, don't write a haiku like that unless it's your haiku day. Like, you do get one haiku day. And if that's it, then you find something beautiful, say it multiple times, and then you're done. Okay. But if you want to keep rallying, find something really unspeakable and write a poem about it. Okay. February 9th, you're going to write a poem that includes the word campestral, or it means of or relating to fields or open country. And if you want more information about like the history of this word and everything, you can visit this page. And then February 10th, you're going to write a found poem off of a novel. So I'd like you to find a novel and just randomly open it and find small phrases, one per page. Like, maybe do like 10 pages, find small phrases, and then use those to make a poem, a found poem. And you can add in words as needed. And then February 11th, you're going to read a collection of poems that you love, and then choose 4 lines from 4 different poems to create a poem. Okay? You don't have to use them. You can use them as the title. You can use them throughout the poem. You can just use a word from those 4 poems, whatever you'd like. But read a book of poems and then write a poem. Okay? That's it for this week, you guys. A little shorter lecture, but you guys are doing a great job. Thank you for watching the lecture last week. Let's keep this up. And as always, you can visit me in my office hours if you have any questions. I'm there Tuesday, Thursday, 11 to 12:30, 1:30 to 3. And if those times don't work for you, just shoot me an email and we'll set up a time to talk on the phone. All right, have a great week.